Okay, so this was earlier today, 3 hours ago. Alec Dawson, who's the lead hero designer, did a sit-down Q&A with Spilo. I only know one thing from it because I saw it from Twitter, but I'm not going to tell you what it is, just in case it's your first time seeing it. But yeah, let's see what's cooking.
Okay, we're way too big. And let's do that. There.
Not
And,
pre-watched.
Okay, let's do this. So, hello everybody.
Oh,
We have a very special guest here. Welcome to any first-time viewers tuning in. If you're new to my stream, my name is Spilo. I'm a former Overwatch League coach. Right now I do a lot of private stuff, a lot of content creation, a lot of hero design, theory crafting. And today I'm joined by Alec Dawson. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I'm Alec. I'm the lead gameplay designer in Overwatch 2. I'm just happy to be here, happy to have a nice long chat.
Yeah, so you were the hero designer here, and I had to check your Twitter when I was talking with Macon. I was like, okay, you're the gameplay designer. So talk to me about, like, what did that promotion look like, and what does that mean in terms of your responsibilities with the team?
Yeah, so what that really means is, so we have our core gameplay pillar, and I'm looking into all of the design areas within that pillar. That's heroes, that's maps, modes, events, and even working closer with our gameplay features and systems team.
Wait, were you guys saying Spilo has a nice setup this time? Does he not normally have a nice setup?
Like people like Gavin and Morgan a little bit closer there too. So I manage a bunch of leads in this area, make sure we're prioritizing correctly what we want to work on, and really about like planning out the next 6 months of Overwatch. You know, like what is that going to look like? Like what is it going to look like in the next year? What are we going to
That's a great question. What does the next 6 months look like?
What are some of the bigger moments from a design standpoint that we can introduce into the game? You know, so it's been great working with a lot more of these teams and just branching out a little bit more, working closely with a lot of really talented people, and still very close to the hero design team. That's probably the group I spend the most time with. And
wait a minute. Was I not paying attention in the beginning? And so he's saying we're working with new people more?
We're still cooking a bunch of awesome stuff coming next few months with next few hero releases. So yeah,
looking forward to it. So for those of you who don't know, before working on Overwatch, you worked on the Hearthstone team over at Blizzard, and then made the transfer over to gameplay. And I remember reading about it and Reddit and Twitter, and there's a lot of apprehension initially, like, oh man, this guy doesn't know anything. He just knows card games. So your lack of first-person shooter experience definitely led to some initial criticism. But overall, I think you've been pretty well received, especially considering the difficulty of the position that you were put in. What were some initial challenges in the early days of the job? Do you feel like your unique background helped you in any ways?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of normal challenges. Like whenever you join a new team, new environment, it's like you come over and you're like, okay, what can I do best? Like, how can I best serve this team? And what skill?
Also, fun fact, Alex also like a fighting game pro, I believe. I don't know what game, but I'm pretty sure he's also a fighting game pro outside of like
that I bring. Is going to be best here, right? So I think a lot of that early on was just looking at how can we spread awareness of like what the hair design team is doing, communicate better within our teams, work a lot with Kenny Hudson, our producer, to make sure like we're getting our process like more formalized, and then talking more about like the philosophies that we have, like going into the future, like how we're going to build things. And like how we're going to actually like structure things so we can like hold ourselves to it,
Right.
And I think that's really important, like making sure that there's just like phrases and sayings that are like, hey, this is the way we do things, and then those become pillars that we can start to like argue against and argue for, and then come back to like every periodical, like every few months, like, is this still something we want in the game? Is this still the thing that we believe in, because it's been dictating some of our decision making, or at least influencing our decision making.
Sure.
That's interesting. It's good to know they're having that conversation. The speed of that conversation is a little bit interesting though, because every few months they're gonna have the conversation of what is this? How is this doing? Do we like it? So like I think a good example of that's probably season 9 changes, which again were great when it came out because it made everything fresh. After about a month, everyone started to see the flaws, but it was still fixable. It was like, hey, this is doable. There was some bad tank metas that also kind of influenced it a little bit. But then after that, people really started to see the writing on the wall that like, man, this passive is oppressive and tank feels like shit. And that hasn't really improved. Granted, I have played a little bit the last couple days. And Emong told me that he feels like it actually, the most recent patch made the tank slightly better because of Sojourn being nerfed, one shot being nerfed. And I actually agree with him. It does actually feel slightly better. But slightly better than death is still not that great. You know what I mean?
So doing a lot of things like that, but I think it was pretty daunting in the beginning. I think probably the biggest thing was you're now responsible for all of these people's work in some way, right? A lot of very talented people, and you're getting in front of people and talking about it, right?
Yeah.
And so I was always very, I loved Overwatch.
I will say really quick, hopefully I can say it, hopefully it's not a bad thing, but like when I went out to the Porsche event, on the last day before everybody went home, we all got dinner because like we had a long day. It's part of like what happens. And I was actually talking to Alec for a little bit because I'm not gonna lie, we were kind of going deep on a lot of stuff. One of the things we talked about was how you have to have tough skin in this industry, both as a creator and on his end. And that's where we have like a lot of mutual respect, where even though I don't agree with a lot of the decisions and I don't agree with like certain things and the speed on how certain things are done, I still respect him a ton for like going out there and actually talking about it, because getting a dev to go out on camera and talk about decisions and why they're making decisions is actually extremely difficult to do, because they get a lot of hate for it. And that's true. And as a creator, I understand that very well, especially being an opinionated creator. Because if you've ever noticed, there isn't really many opinionated creators that most people are like, oh yeah, I love that guy. Like everyone's like, yeah, I love that guy. Like you're ever opinionated in any way, it's like very polar. It's like either they hate the guy or they love the guy. And it can happen the same way with like devs and stuff like that. And it's daunting because it's not what they signed up for. So I do give them a lot of respect for that, and being the person that comes out and tries to talk about a lot more. Because in Overwatch 1, when there was Jeff Goodman, the balance guy, that guy never got on camera, never talked about anything. So you got to give Alec credit for that.
Played a lot of competitive.
So there's a lot of mutual respect in that department.
I played a lot of shooters growing up. I went to a bunch of OWL matches, but it wasn't like didn't have like the complete download of Overwatch at that time and play, because I was working on other things, and that's where like most of my time was like I couldn't name you the top 5 ball players. I could probably name like the top 2 at the time, right? Or something like that. So you come in, you start to download, you start to ask a bunch of questions because it's your responsibility now. So like I would spend a lot of time in those early days with Josh, just being like, okay, why do we make all these changes? What is the intent to? Right? Josh No, yeah, our lead balance designer. So, and we were just like, he was gracious enough to give me a bunch of his time. Like we'd sit there for 2 hours and just talk through like his intent and his philosophies, and try to understand like what are we doing on the team and where we're going to go in the future. So, but yeah, background wise, fairly holistic. I worked on a bunch of different things. I started in mobile, working a bunch of stuff, and when you're in a small studio, it was like 5-6 people.
Hey, wait, whatever happened to mobile Overwatch? Wasn't that something that was like being reportedly worked on, or like under like there was like positions for it, and then whatever happened? Did that shit go with the PvE too? Oh man.
You just do a bunch of different things. Like I did puzzle design, and also like did business agreements for an arcade cabinet.
People found like links to like LinkedIn.
Those are really
stuff.
Things, right, from the day to day.
Forever ago.
And then coming over to Hearthstone,
that's old news.
Design over there at that point in time was pretty holistic as well. Like we would be doing VO recordings, we'd be doing art descriptions, we'd be writing all the lines, not just like all.
No, you guys laugh and say like mobile Overwatch, like Switch was already bad enough, dude. Honestly, mobile Overwatch, as long as it wasn't like the same actual game, like they like kind of like made it more gacha-y and like kind of like turned it into a mobile-ish game somehow, could go incredibly hard. It would probably be a money printer. Like you guys don't understand how much money mobile games print.
The words on the cards, so we were doing a bunch of stuff. So I think that helped out a little bit coming over to Overwatch in the sense of, I care a lot about not just the mechanics of our heroes, but how they're presented. Being able to have conversations with our VFX teams, our sound teams, our animation teams, and just understanding at least enough of their language that you can, give quality feedback, listen to them, and ask good questions.
I feel like that's part of leadership as well. I think we live in a very specialized world right now, but a little bit of diversification can really help you to lead your team effectively, I find.
Yeah. And then on the design time, it's just something you learn. I think like the way I've always done this thing where I like end up like creating like little metaphors for like what I'm designing on at that particular moment. Like Hearthstone was this puzzle where you had to have like hundreds of pieces, and like how did they come together? And all the pieces had to be great, right? Overwatch is a lot of backwards and forwards. There's still this framework of a puzzle, and we spend a good amount of time figuring out what that framework's going to look like, but a lot of times that's in our prototyping phase, which is 3 months or whatever.
Right.
And that's not the hardest part. The hardest part is like, okay, now we have 4 pieces of this puzzle, and they have to be perfect. They have to be rich and full enough. They have to be clear enough, and they have to be, and that's all you have. Like, you don't get to, it's really easy to make a kit that like does a certain thing if you like keep adding and adding and adding and adding. But it's like what Overwatch is about is like this very concise framework of design,
You're tempting me with those 4 things. I will stay on script, but if you want to elaborate on those 4 things.
No, I'm talking more of it's like, here's all the pieces of your kit.
Oh, I
right?
see.
Like, here's what you get to work with. So these abilities need to be versatile enough. They need to be clear enough. They need to make sense, and it's just making a diamond. We're just making it as perfect as possible.
I see what you're saying. It's a lot more precise. A lot more precise. Okay. Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit already. Coincidentally,
4 pieces. I thought that was going a totally different totally different way.
A lot more. And I don't know how familiar you are with Overwatch's past, and there's a lot of great things. But one of the things that I was always very critical of was the communication. It just felt like there was a clear gap between the development team and the community, and I feel like in many ways that gap has closed significantly.
That's true.
Which is great for me, because I get to know what's going on. There's a lot more communication, there's a lot more transparency, but it also means that there's a lot more vulnerability on your end. I understand how that can be to a small extent. How do you deal with that? Because every single time, I made a joke about it the last time you tweeted, every single time you tweet, there's just a list of, like, a laundry list of people that are asking for this and complaining and griping and snapping at you and calling you names.
True.
How do you deal with that level of pressure?
I was talking about earlier.
I think you definitely develop a little bit of a skin. But the way, and by the way, I think we do a good job of communicating. I think we can do even better. I think we can do even better.
I'm glad he says that.
I think this is great. We're gonna get through a bunch of questions and everything.
Chat, it's not pre-watched, okay? It's not pre-watched. It's not pre-watched. I was here, okay? I was asleep and then I got live, all right? F you. This is not pre-watched, all right? The thing is, a lot of these conversations are similar in terms of certain aspects. They just happen to be talking about something that I also have talked about before.
I think it's really about developing a filter. I think you have to understand, like, what is this person trying to say? What is this feedback? You stop taking feedback at exactly face value. You kind of like filter it through. You're like, okay, like, I understand where the feedback's coming from. I understand the emotions. I understand what they want, and like, how can we act on this to make something that's good. So you just like hear a lot. We talk about our community team a lot. Make sure that they're giving us reports about like where sentiment is, what are some of the hot topics. But I think even as designers, we're reading all of it too. Like we see it. We see it on YouTube. We see it on Reddit. We see it on Twitter.
No, you guys can't come in here. You guys can't come in here and say that. What the
sort of getting this like, okay,
same time too? What is that? What is that? You guys can't come in and say what the
the community's saying, here's the hot button issues, here's some things they're talking about, here's some really good arguments, and starting to like how that kind of breeds, and then you talk about it as a team,
Sure.
But I think there's standard things like slightly less social media time, things like that, that do help. Like taking Twitter off your phone is probably a good one.
Okay, so little thing about me really, really quick. I actually have like a folder, and I never use folders for any apps on my phone, but I have a folder specifically that's labeled open only for work. And it has PayPal, Instagram, TikTok, IVCam, which was when like the time I was trying to figure out a way to use my phone camera on OBS. It didn't do well. Authenticator, Threads, Reddit, and Twitter. And it's basically just to not have to try to open it.
Ooh,
I still open it, but I try not to.
That is a good one. So I guess we could talk about a little bit about Season 11 here, because obviously there's a lot of things that have changed. A lot of balance tweaks, Cassidy update, new map, even a map rework, which obviously we've...
Well, I don't actually use Reddit. It's just like that would technically also fall under that category. So like I throw it in there.
Talked about that one a lot, but what are you most excited about and why?
I mean, the glass, right? The glass. No, I think that was great.
Pandering answers.
I gotta know. How did you guys find that clip?
How we find? We see every clip. Everything that comes up, right?
True.
But Ruisapi is a really beautiful map. I think it does a lot of good things for like push and sort of it has a lot of design lessons.
I will say they actually are very good at finding every clip
of things that we learned, and here's some things we learned in terms of design of push maps. Here it is. But I think Cassie is the biggest one. Magnetic Grenade, we all know, wasn't very beloved. So it was something that we wanted to touch for quite a bit of time. And I think now he just has a much more understandable and natural threat radius. I think there was times where Magnetic Grenade like whoop, come back behind you and hit you, or trap you to a certain extent where you just like didn't expect it. And
I loved the
delay.
Hinda. It was fun.
More instant, and you understand the engagement a lot better.
It was stupid, but I found it funny.
And I think it's something that's just like quality of life for us. It just feels really good mechanically. I think it feels better to approach it too.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Okay. Great. Were there any specific goals that you wanted to accomplish besides the individual things? Were there any holistic, like this patch we'd like to address this larger scale issue, or is it more of like a lot of little small things like the glass?
Something like the balance patch overall.
Yeah, just this season 11 overall. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like hitting top meta, that was one of the goals, shifting power around, and also some heroes that haven't, gotten changes in a bit or have been lost by some recent changes. And if you look at the top meta stuff, we're talking like Kiriko and Sojourn have been around and very prominent for a long time. And I think Sojourn, we've kind of actually started to see like she's actually hit that power level threshold or lower than the threshold where, okay, her popularity is dropping. It is actually dropping at like a rapid rate in terms of where she's going to end up compared to where she's.
One of the things I was very concerned about with that was they give Sojourn 3 buffs, 1 nerf, and I was like, ooh, that's terrifying, because they did that last time they tried to nerf Sojourn and they made her even better. But I am very pleased to actually say that I was wrong and that it actually did make Sojourn a lot weaker and there's a lot less of there. So it's been a very good change.
Basically her entire existence in Overwatch too.
Yep.
Roadhog is pretty popular, when there are sharper mechanics. I think we don't want to see a certain popularity level. We try not to play favorites. We try to be quite impartial, but at the same time, with how survivable he was, and in terms of he has this combo and everything, I think he was seen very popular rates even at the highest levels of play, right? So we wanted to get that a bit more stabilized too. When it comes to the shifting levels of power, Sojourn's a good example. Awari's a good example of, hey, where can we push a little bit? We take out some power in their kit or push some power in their kit into places where we think they might fill a better role. Sojourn was really kind of shifting that around, and I think we actually have a better base to work off of with this where Railgun is now, that we can inject some in the future,
Right.
Yeah. And then
not just tweaking balance strength, but like shifting things around, like gears within the kit, even if they're at the same strength, but a healthier version of that strength. Maybe.
Yeah, and she took a nerf, right? Like she did get nerfed, but I think there's a lot more we can do with her now, right? Looking at spread, looking at some other things, and then Symmetra, Diva, Reaper, just characters that got a little lost. Some of those got lost in the armor changes. Symmetra just got lost in terms of there was the brief Malga meta that we reacted to very quickly, and we wanted to make sure she got addressed a little bit in this patch and give her a little love. So
okay, perfect. So I guess going back to the glass, we've been seeing a lot of map reworks. Got the opportunity to talk with Ryan Smith in LA, and he was very excited talking about all these things that are going on behind the scenes. So what puts a map as under the microscope as needing a rework? It's not like a hero that has too high of a win rate. What are your subjective, objective, whatever measures that highlight a map as being quote unquote problematic, besides some funny guy screaming about it for 10 minutes?
Oh, me.
Well, feedback is important, right? But we do some surveys and rounds of that where we get a lot of feedback from the community of which maps they like, which maps they don't like, which modes they like, which modes they don't like. So that informs some of our targets. But a lot of those targets kind of lined up with our own intuition of like some things that needed updated. There's also just like the game's change and some of the design sets that over time, right? I think we understand where some of the pain points are. Some of our philosophies of how we actually build out levels are a little bit different. Like there's some older maps that just have these really, really brutal choke points, right? And a lot of the newer maps are a bit more breathable. There's some that's a little bit loose. There's a lot more flank routes, things like that. We want to make sure like we open up some of those old maps to allow you to have better approaches, right? And that's something we're doing, in the season 13 map rework cycle, where there's going to be a variety of maps that are getting like more access to different pathways, right?
Sure.
So those are some of the things we utilize to make sure that we are targeting the right maps. It's just like
that's actually probably one of the best answers you could have heard, because basically what he just said was the way we pick what we're going to redo or what we're going to look at is the community reaction. And I think that should be a more prominent theme in some other places. Because, granted, I don't think they should knee-jerk anytime the community says anything. Because sometimes that happens. Sometimes a couple people get mad about something, or a couple people say something, and they instantly knee-jerk it back. But it's like, it's hard. It's hard to say which is which. And it's like, there's certain ones, like Kiri being Bennett for 7 seasons, and Sojourn being strong for 10 seasons, that shouldn't take as long to knee-jerk back, right? So I hope that's a new coming theme.
Community feedbacks on this survey stuff, some of the things that we just want to bring some of our new design philosophies forward to some of the older maps too.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Do you feel like you applied any of those with the Runasapi?
Renaissance in particular is a lot of learnings. I think there's certain things with run back times that are polished compared to how they were previously. There's a lot more direct, simple pathways to get back into the fights. If you look at around some of the points, they're a lot more open in terms of like where you get the forward spawn and forward checkpoint to get you to the forward spawn. Those are a lot more open compared to some of the other ones. So there's a lot more like cover. You can get around back a little bit more easily. And then there's when you come into the final stretch, it's more of like a traditional choke, right?
Yeah.
Rather than some of the other maps where you kind of like turn the corner in Toronto, and it's like.
Actually, the person apparently who designed the map, who made Runasapi, was in my chat yesterday talking about how it was their last map they made on the Overwatch team. They also made Esperanza. I'm not gonna lie, it made me a little bit sad, but it was cool.
And a lot of teams get a little lost there, and they're like, wait, like we can get up the hill, but then we don't know how to get it like into this last straightaway, and that's always been like a really big problem and push, where a lot of teams don't actually end the game. The push can be this thing where it's like, okay, we'll get it back to here, but then it's like it feels like we don't know what to do at this point in time because it's really hard to get that last 10%, right?
Yes.
So those are some of the things that we changed there. I think. A lot of like really just great lessons, and I think as we release
my two favorite push maps for sure.
The first batch of them we learned a lot, and then we applied to the next one. Like right now we're looking at the next Flashpoint map and some of the lessons we've learned from some of the earlier ones and how we can apply those.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so in September 2023, you mentioned in a director's take that new heroes should be launched on the safe side of strong. How would you assess that slogan on some of the more recent characters? Too strong, not strong enough? With all the future characters now being available at launch, does that change that approach either as well? Because now every character is apparently immediately accessible.
Yeah, so let's go through like Awari, actually like in the ballpark. I think there was a little bit of artificial numbers that we pushed in terms of like her primary fire and the ult. But Awari was right in the ballpark where we want. So what we're really shooting for is like right around 55, 57. So it's a little bit higher than we would normally do, right? Malga, so pushed too far. Actually, the trial was much more like at this average point, and I think we reacted a little bit too heavily. And then some of the things we introduced, I think he just got a little bit too takey overall in terms of his launch. So pushed a little bit too far, and then Venture right in the ballpark again. Venture
Venture's good.
Look at. We loved how it went, actually.
Venture was actually very good.
Their whole launch period, they were like a top 3 DPS. And even after we did the initial round of nerfs, they were still quite strong. And then the further tweaking got them into a really good place that they're still like in that, like, during the month of, it was Venture 4th, right, the whole season. So during that month, we want to make sure Venture was pretty popular, get a lot of play rate, and...
Funny he says that because I feel like a lot of people thought Venture was not very good after the nerfs and were confused by the nerfs a lot. So I wonder if that's a general player base number, or is like where does that come from?
Venture right now is still in that that top group of DPS, can get a lot of value, and we feel really good about how that went. So your question is like, do we keep the slogan how it's going?
Yeah,
I think it's yeah. Go ahead.
No, I assume that's you continue with that moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's pretty queer what our intentions are, and I like being clear with our community. Like, hey, this is how we're going to launch heroes, and then we'll peel them back a little bit over time.
Sure.
But we want to make sure that window is really exciting. If anything, I think looking at how Venture went, we may have actually we're like, hey, do we actually let that initial launch period last even longer? Because I think a lot of people after those 2 weeks, they didn't have the fondest. They're like, why are you nerfing Venture? Venture's so much fun. It was like, well, Venture's really, really strong, and you have this responsibility to try to get things into a certain range. But at the same time, I think we could have maybe let that go.
I just didn't feel like Venture was that strong.
And then with new heroes,
this is actually a good example of what I was talking about before about the community sentiment thing and how they should sometimes lean a little bit more towards it versus the data, because balancing the game like Overwatch, if you just sit there and look at the numbers, you're going to fail. They did that in Overwatch 1. I was there. I mean, I know a lot of the team is new and they weren't there, but we were all, a lot of us that have been around for years were there. And that was what they used to justify. They would justify certain changes with numbers. And actually, I'll give you a good example. People always look back to that October 2020 Overwatch patch. Do you know what broke that patch? Do you know why October was the end of good Overwatch and then after that it went back to the Dark Ages? I'll tell you exactly what happened. There was 2 things. One, window for Baptiste became a widescreen movie theater. It went from a small square to a widescreen movie theater. So which it was a lot harder to in the beginning to shoot through it because you had to be much more bunched up. So that now it is today. It's much more wide. It's much more easy to shoot through. There was more damage that could get pumped out, and stuff would explode a lot faster. And they also buffed Brig. So Brig got buffed. BAP got buffed. And then there was a few other smaller changes, but those were the big 2 that shook up the whole game because BAP enabled either double shield or Rein Zarya, but Brig, being strong, actually kept the double shield together because you couldn't run dive onto the double shield, and double shield would beat the rush. So double shield kept in check the Rein Zarya tanks, and Brig kept in check the Winston D.Va ball tanks. And so by having both of those, it just became double shield meta. That is what broke it. The community sentiment was, don't buff those heroes. Stop. The response was that the data showed that Brig and BAP were both weak. That's what killed it, because they looked at the data, not the game.
I think our trials help here a lot, right? Our trials give us that early look where we feel confident enough that we can launch those heroes into competitive, on day one, or it just gives us is anything out of whack, right?
Yeah.
Anything,
they also buffed Orisa.
I think that's been really
good.
And that was something, after
again, it was all cited
that's really helped a lot
at that time that they were underperforming data-wise.
Better spot, and we can react pretty quickly.
Yeah. Speaking of Lifeweaver, we talked about support characters. One of the questions is talking about utility with support specifically, and how, especially in higher ranks, a lot of the times we often see the same supports generally staying meta. Baptiste, Kiriko, Lucio, characters that are generally considered to have higher skill ceilings. And that's normal for a lot of games, right? But I think one of the problems is that a lot of the lower skill, at least perceived lower skill supports, is that they just don't have competitive utility. Is that something that you're looking to address with future support characters? Is that something that we're continuing evaluating current support characters? Kind of an open-ended question.
Yeah, if we look at it right now, I think if you look at Ilaria recently, she's climbing a ton at the highest ranks right now, right? I think it's about making some of those heroes.
Good. I'm actually surprised they buffed her.
Niches, it's just a bit more strong and more unique.
Right.
So I think some of those changes were geared she is going to hold points better. She's going to hold chokes and different things a little bit better. It's going to be a little bit harder to destroy. It's going to heal the team up more, a little bit better in a poke comp, perhaps, rather than some of the flanking style that she was getting the benefit from the turret previously. So I'm making sure they're playing a little bit more towards different places. I think we, at the same time, we're okay with certain heroes not ever reaching the highest levels of competitive play.
Really?
I think Moira in particular, we're okay with some heroes being a little bit more simple to understand, a little bit more approachable. And we've done a lot of work.
That's actually very interesting. That is a big shift from what it was previously. For years, Overwatch has always wanted heroes to have some type of niche on all levels. That's actually extremely interesting, because Moira is a more simplistic character. Moira was really strong in Season 9 because of her survivability, and that it was that weird ball Moira / Zen Lucio meta. When it was Zen Lucio, then after that, it was Moira Lucio running around in circles type of shit. That's actually super, super interesting. That poses a question, though, does it not? 2 questions. 1, what heroes do they deem in that category? Say Moira, right? Does Orisa fall into that category? Does Hog? Does Malga? Does Mercy? Does Lifeweaver? How far does it go? Does Sim or Mei fall into those categories? That's very interesting. It's actually very, very interesting.
Think of utility for Moira and play with utility for Moira.
Yeah.
But it all kind of distracted from the main gameplay loop that people kind of love and they've attached to. So I don't think that means that's what we'll do forever. I think that means just kind of like we'll spend a lot of time on something, see if it's worth it, and if an idea comes later, we'll reapproach it again.
Yeah, are projectile heroes on that list as well? Because historically, projectile heroes in Overwatch 1 kind of fell into two categories, which was spammy, just kind of throw it all the damage down the choke, or high utility. Right, you look at a character, even if you look at almost every projectile character, they have some form of utility, whether it's a scouting, it's a trap, it's a boop, a wall. And it feels like in Overwatch 2, some of that utility has maybe fallen off in terms of value.
True.
And so a lot of the projectile characters struggle to compete because their mouse ones aren't always as effective. Are projectile heroes, I guess, not necessarily specifically, but are some projectile heroes on that list of characters that you guys are going to continue to look at?
Yes, but at the same time, I'll challenge on a little bit. I do think projectile heroes, some of them are really strong right now. I think Pharah is really strong. Venture is really strong. I think it may not feel like that just because Cassie is so popular right now. Cassie's really like just the line keeps going up a little bit on Cassie, but same with Pharah. Pharah, I think in the last 3 weeks has like tripled her play rate. So people are finally like latching onto the rework and everything. So. I do think
Jesus
there's
Christ, I knew she was popular, but
I think like Hanzo in particular, Hanzo's the one we've been talking about in terms of he's kind of lost his identity within the cast. We look at Storm Era is the place to look as in terms of bringing back some of the one shot for certain thresholds, and that's some of the stuff we're playing with at the moment. I think we previewed this a little bit ago. We're actually playing with some changes for to bring some characters that are a bit more squirrely to 225 and seeing how that goes. And it does benefit Hanzo at that point. He becomes a character that can actually be very.
Hot take: we never needed to increase the health pools. It was really just a band-aid fix. The reason why we had problems with Season 8. There was too much healing in the game, and so it was either you absolutely exploded or you didn't kill anything. We needed to nerf healing. It was needed to nerf healing, not increase the health pools, not put in the DPS passive. Those things were a great band-aid fix, but it didn't work long term. The problem was you felt like you couldn't kill certain things, and if they got pocketed, like you couldn't get kills, and DPS felt terrible, right? And so did tank. But that's why tank still feels bad, because you don't have the passive. So DPS can kill things, but tank doesn't feel that good because it's still the same Season 8 healing. It's literally the same exact healing pretty much across the board, if not buffed slightly, plus bigger health pools. That's why you can't kill anything, especially if they don't have the passive on them. So it's like
very effective against some of those characters. But I think he's on our list right now of, what's his identity going to be in the future? And we're working on him actively at the moment.
So tying almost back into where you're okay with certain characters maybe not being able to compete as well. This one's going to be, follow me with this one. It's going to be a little bit of a rabbit trail here. So one of the critical tenets of human psychology is that we often take the easy way out. We're risk averse. We don't like going for the most necessarily effective
This is a Spilo question.
And I feel like that reflects itself oftentimes in metas. For example, ranked meta generally is more poke oriented than pro meta. Characters like Iliari, Torbjorn, Malga, Sigma, and so on. Do you guys factor that into balance at all? Because oftentimes when people complain about a meta, it will be with those characters that just, they just deny anything that I want to do. I try to go in, I try to make an engagement. They deny that. We see that with Iliari, we see that with Torbjorns, we see that with some of the Roadhogs and things like that. Playstyle flexibility is important, but humans do tend to the passive option, and that punishes the active heroes. Do you guys factor that in at all? Like I said, very open-ended question, but it seems that a lot of the more tempo, fast, movement-oriented characters sometimes are quote-unquote countered by characters that don't have to put in that same level of effort.
Yeah, I think if we look at a few things like, our lower skill heroes, tend to be, more consistent, but the higher skill ones, they have a payoff that's there, right? And I think that's really important for us. But also just looking at how heroes can be more proactive, how we can introduce more risk. That's something we've been looking at for a number of heroes. I think we're looking at that right now for Malga, right? I think Malga's actually in this interesting place where he plays really well in a highly coordinated environment. But I think if you look at him otherwise, it's kind of the same play style that you've seen previously to some extent, right? But how can we introduce a little bit more risk for a little bit more value for going in and getting some of that? Venture was one during development that was pretty interesting. For a while, Venture had this primary fire where they would same primary fire, but you'd shoot it and then broke into shrapnel, right? And a lot of that was because players wouldn't. they didn't know what to do when they couldn't hit something that was like more than 15 meters away. They're just like, hey, how do I go in? What do I do? Like, how do I poke this turret? And so for a long time, we gave this fire fighters like, oh, and I can poke the turret, but then people just weren't doing the combo stuff. They were kind of hanging back, even though they weren't getting the value, right?
Right.
Even though it was purposely weak, right? But that's what people would do,
Right.
because they we're like, no, we have to cut that. We got to go back to like this primary fire where there is very restricted, and you are going to be encouraged to go in, and the temporary shields kind of help that and encourage that a little bit. We are going to be, there's at least a little bit of protection there, right? You can be a little tanky during these moments. So yeah.
That's interesting. So that's notice the fact that people, if given the option, will do nothing. You have to kind of force them to do things. But it feels so rewarding. I love Venture. Like I've loved playing Venture. So okay. Continuing off this is all the negative stuff because this is all the hero design.
Okay, really quick. That's actually super interesting. One, we just heard the phrases low skill and high skill heroes we used, which is fucking awesome because that's something people have said for years. Two, they had to find ways to like incentivize people to play certain styles. And you even said Malga. Okay, you know what? I'm starting to feel this way a little bit. Malga's starting to feel a little bit like Overwatch 1 Brig. Not in brokenness, but in the fact that high-level players think that Malga's broken, but low-level players might not. Because apparently, and I mean what Alec is saying, I don't really see many people outside of high-level play complain about Malga, but Malga blows to play against at high level when you get a good, like a Malga versus you're cooked. But in your metal ranks, they don't even know how to use the buttons, right? Like we've seen like, obviously like spectating broads is a little bit different, but like they literally just don't even know what the button does 90% of the time. And the teammates don't know what the button does. So they're not using it effectively. And in Overwatch 1, people would scream about Brig at the high level because of how busted she was. But they didn't understand how to play her in silver or gold because they tried to play her like a mini Reinhardt. But that's not how you played Brig. You played Brig as a long-range denying character. So, like, it was just an intuitive difference. That's very interesting when he said about Malga, because Malga kind of feels that way sort of too. Interesting.
Stuff I cry about, right? So does the team prioritize balancing / managing heroes that are more universally hated? Because we love to have every character be relatively well received.
This is a good one.
For example, Tracer has been at least soft meta for quite a long time. I mean, it feels like since season 9. And I've definitely seen some complaints. But compared to, for example, when Roadhog, Malga, those characters were meta for a significantly shorter period of time, people are pulling their hair out. Does that factor in at all into your decisions as a designer?
It does. I think there's like some things at play, right? I think like tanks get a lot more attention while the gameplay kind of like goes through them. They kind of
that's actually something me and Alec talked about.
Extent. And then Malga and Roadhog have some more sharp mechanics. Like they're very survivable. They can
we actually had this exact conversation
in the right sort of time frame. But yes, I do think heroes have like a threshold or a half-life to how long they can be, meta. Before we need to come in and act, and those differ greatly, right? There was this term on Hearthstone, I think it's someone in the community like coined it, was called like a grievance rate, where it's okay, certain decks are going to have certain grievance rates, and if they're more popular, like they can't be popular for so long unless and our job is to come in kind of like make sure some of those frustrations actually go down, right? But if you see it like once in every X amount of games, it's okay. I do think there's things that can live as long as they're not, the thing you see every single game, right? If you saw Widowmaker every single game, I think, that may not be the best for us, but we like Widow in certain maps. We like Widow, like players being able to pull up these really skillful moments. And I think it creates like an interesting relationship, but if it was every game, I think we'd have to come in, right?
I remember talking about this with you in LA, and you said everything's okay to be meta occasionally. The variety itself is okay, and maybe that's especially considering compared to something like a League of Legends where there's so many heroes, right? Overwatch kind of does need to cycle through characters as we're expanding that kit. So
that's true.
I said on my chat I was going to ask any targeted hero questions, but I'm going to ask one. And there's a reason behind it, because I think it's a good litmus test for your approach to other things. Because I have been a grouch about the Wrecking Ball some of the discussion around Wrecking Ball. Because my problem with Wrecking Ball has been that he has infinite survivability until he doesn't. Until you have that Somber hack or
I remember he
talked
talked about this in the podcast.
Or whatever else, then he just melts. And if I love the what was it, the retract change. I love the adaptive shields change. I think all that stuff has been really fun and added an even higher level of skill and value. But some things that still remain is that the guy still dies to CC and he has no way of counterplaying it. And if you don't have CC, he's basically almost unkillable. He doesn't have a head hitbox half the time and so on. So when you're finding a character like Wrecking Ball that's struggling, sometimes I don't always fully understand when it feels like some of the changes don't address weaknesses. Is it that you want these characters to have very defined weaknesses and are okay with that? Or is that, because my argument is that some of these weaknesses are almost too strong. Right, that becomes the definition of the character's identity.
The counter.
Do you guys have any philosophy when it comes to that? Do you disagree? Agree?
Disproportionately stronger than others.
Wrecking Ball in particular.
Sure, Wrecking Ball in particular, but I think this also applies to characters like Malga and Roadhog and other characters.
Yeah, I think overall, we want clear shapes and weaknesses. I think that's sort of like what Overwatch is built on. It allows people to understand the game, very well, very quickly. I think the one thing, we talk about pretty frequently is like how extreme should those be?
Of course.
And right now, we're looking at Wrecking Ball. We're trying some things I'm working at, but I think we're looking at more of the side of like, hey, should some of these abilities just not be as effective on tanks? We're looking at Sleep Dart again. We're looking at Alec. Like maybe Hack should take a little bit longer to hit on a tank, and then Wrecking Ball can use his mobility to make sure he's like out of range, things like that. But we do want to make sure that.
You said they were looking at Sleep Dart again for tanks. That's kind of big.
Wrecking Ball very well, very quickly. I think the one thing we talk about pretty frequently is like how extreme should those be?
Of course.
And right now we're looking at Wrecking Ball. We're trying some things I'm working at, but I think we're looking at more of the side of like, hey, should some of these abilities just not be as effective on tanks? We're looking at Sleep Dart again. We're looking at Alec. Like,
is this the start of a passive where they instead of they get knockback resistance, they get all forms of ability resistance? So like anti-nade, Sleep Dart, boop, burning, all that stuff. Because like, oh man, I don't think I've ever heard a better potential argument for, I hate to say it, but 5v5 versus 6v6. Like it just, you're going into super overtuned territory, and I get it. It's like that. It honestly is something that has to be done because tank feels so bad. But if it's getting like that, that's kind of wild.
Maybe Hack should take a little bit longer to hit on a tank, and then Wrecking Ball can use his mobility to make sure he's like out of range, things like that. But we do want to make sure that he's not like doesn't have too much CC, just play against CC, because I think at that point, like in certain thresholds and ranks, like players aren't going to be able to actually do anything against it. But we want to I think there's a way to smooth it out though a little bit. Yeah.
Right. I would be curious to see how that works out, because I think would you be able to return that ability to make it harder for CC to be effective on tanks? Would that then come counterbalanced by reducing his effective HP? I know this is a very specific question, but is that on the table?
Yeah, I think so.
It's like a little from column A, a little come from B. He's got to give and take, right?
I think to an extent. I think Wrecking Ball right now, actually, when we look at him compared, we have these like very pretty broad measures of like survivability and looking at the cast overall, and we look at like how it went from like season 8 to season 9, and like a lot of folks went down, right? Because that was part of the intent. We took a bunch of healing out of the game. Wrecking Ball is actually the one character right now that is one of the few characters that actually is more survivable than he was previously, right? Yep. So I think there is a little room to maybe possibly decrease some of the HP and things like that to see if he does get out of hand, right? Okay. When we decrease some of the other things that maybe affected him.
Of course. And this feels like a natural question to follow, because I want to ask about that topic. I want to ask about dynamism when it comes to balancing, because a common criticism of, it's ironic because it feels like many of the Overwatch 2 heroes have fallen into the Kiriko Sojourn category, where they don't have necessarily any super strongly defined strengths or weaknesses, but they have some here and there, at least initially. And then you have characters like Malga and Lifeweaver who have extremely well-defined strengths and weaknesses. So Do you guys have a philosophy when it comes to hero design? Do you want to find somewhere in between? Do you want, obviously you said how defined weaknesses is very important. What is your approach to hero design? Has that changed over the course of like the last year and a half?
Yeah, I think players want less hard counters, you know? I think a lot of the older designs certainly lean to like very,
Yes.
very hard counters, right?
Yes.
At the same time, I do think we've made some safe designs. I think there's some
Dude, am I listening to what I think I'm listening to right now?
characters,
I'll talk about it
some
after.
heroes that we've made, you know, that have just been almost too well-rounded. They kind of do a little bit of everything, and you know, you wonder like, how do I approach this character in particular? So yeah, there was a certain, especially on our supports. I think if we look at like even like Alari, you like Outburst, you know, it's like, oh, like Alari's like this poke hero and it has this turret, and then also has like a get off of me button too. That can be, you know, I like that it's like, you know, has this mobility as well. That's kind of nice to have like that bimodal thing. But we had this, you know, we have our different goals for each role, and one of the ones we had at the beginning of Overwatch 2, and this is really due to a lot of the feedback at the time, was that support heroes would be scrappy. You know, they could like fight back a little bit more because of what we were seeing in those early days, right? We've since scrapped the scrappy goal, so that's no longer around. But that was something I think that Alari was a part of. It was just like, oh yeah, she's gonna be able to like survive by herself a little bit and make sure because she can really good. But if anything, like that character should be able to be dove a little bit more easily, right?
Do you mind if I ask you like why you
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna let
scrap that, and
hold on.
Is there a philosophy that's replaced that?
Yeah, I think it just became this. I think when we look at sort of the
how recent is this?
dynamic between the roles, I don't. Support should still be able to like, you know, they still be able to deal damage, still be able to defend themselves, but they got too good at it. We think, right? There's too much survivability baked into it. After you would get to, you know, part of the goal is like getting to the support in the back line, right? Like that should be like part of the challenge and the hard part sometimes, right? And we look at
Chat, I know this interview's today. I'm not stupid. I'm saying like, when did they change this philosophy idea?
things like Zen Kick and like how good that was as like a get off me as well. So I think there was an extent we just went too far, right? In that way. So I think right now even we look at some of the, you know, some of the feature supports where, hey, we can claw back a little bit like our next year is a lot of mobility, but we're making like a even down the line support, and we're like, hey, maybe we don't need like support.
Our next hero is a lot of what?
Mobility. Like maybe if they don't need to actually fight back when they're in close range a little bit. But I think we gave a little bit that too much to everyone at a certain point in time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So how do you feel? Yeah.
How do I feel? Before Spilo says anything. Me first. First up, what the did I just hear? I was like ranting at the end of last season about how I'm frustrated with like this like almost it feels like they just kind of let the rails just like the game is like think about like you have like a horse that's pulling you, right? And you're not guiding the horse. The horse starts guiding you, right? Like you're trying to get him to pull left, but he doesn't want to go left, so he goes straight. And you're like, like what do? I can't get this horse to slow down, right? That's what it kind of feels like they did with Overwatch 2, where they're going into the game, they have a set goal. They're like, we want less hard counters. We don't believe counterpicking is a thing in Overwatch. We want people to play whatever heroes they want. This is our goal. You know, that's why we can have heroes behind the battle pass, because it's actually not that bad. And then as the game progressed, that's not how it shook out because the format changed. And then they said, actually, you know what? That's actually how the way we like the game. And it's like you're pretending that you actually did want to go straight with the horse, but you actually tried to take the horse to the left, but it just went forward. And the people next to you went, "Hey, weren't we supposed to go left?" And you're like, "Oh no, I wanted to go straight actually." And it's like it never felt good to me. I never liked that. That always kind of pissed me off a little bit. And here we are today, a culmination of all of it building up over time, where it's like the hardcore counterpick meta, hardcore all this stuff, and it's like it's ass and it doesn't feel good. And that's honestly one of the biggest things I think fuels the 6v6 argument. People is that tank especially is disproportionately affected by counterpicking, and it's much more oppressive, right? This horse narrative is confusing me. Well, considering you just said me, I'm assuming you're probably not. You're not paying attention too well. But they're letting the game. They're saying the idea of what I'm telling you is that they told us what they were trying to do. The game didn't work out that way, and so then they said, "Oh, actually, the way the game's working now is actually our philosophy," which I don't buy. I never bought that. I never agreed with it. I remember when Jared came on and said in like season 4 or 5, I was like, I don't like that at all. I think it was with SVB. Here we are now, And they're kind of going back and going, well, actually, we don't like that. We actually don't like the hardcore counterpicking. Since when? When has that been the new philosophy change? Because that's good if true. And they're mentioning supports in particular being more scrappy because that was the whole point of Overwatch 2 support, right? Like they got buffed to the moon to make them more DPS heavy and to not be support, not healer, right? From what he just said, though, that's not what they're trying to do anymore. They're trying to bring it back to like what it used to be in Overwatch, where it's more almost the old style, where they're not scrappy and going for kills. You still can, but that's not the point. Since when? When has that become the new change? Because like I don't feel like it feels like that way right now. I will say the thing that forces it to feel that way is that if your supports don't hard pocket your tank, you just instantly lose, right? And so as a support player, you feel like you can't play the game because you're basically babysitting your tank the entire time because the second you look away from me, he explodes. Is that how they're forcing it? Is that by design? Is that how they're trying to get people to stop going out and trying to like go and do fragging and go for kills consistently? Is to force them not to look at the tank more? Because what's happened is players still want to play the scrappy play style and they run around and go for kills, and then the tank dies and then they lose the game. So are they like conditioning them to stop doing that by losing more games, but at the detriment of the tank player feeling so shit? I kind of like what you're cooking. I just don't like the ingredients you're using. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so community here, and this seems like a good time to ask this question based off of that. So everyone has the opinion when it comes to player feedback. We talked about how you guys are very aware of it. You guys get feedback from even within your own community team, but people aren't necessarily going to agree with each other on what needs to change.
True.
What are the most important sources of feedback for you guys? If I'm like a random plat player and I think I've got a brilliant rework, it's basically you guys are inaccessible, but how do you guys feel that you're able to stay in touch with the community without necessarily exposing yourself to every single harebrained idea floating out there?
True.
It's like about not having blind spots. I think if we only read like one source of feedback, we're only going to get the same sort of feedback to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Or from the same sort of like players, or because they kind of think alike a lot of the times. To make sure like we're getting feedback from high level players, to make sure we're getting feedback from low level players. And I haven't seen it in our testing, like when we run external tests, right? We'll make sure we get a range of players so we can get feedback of like, okay, is this approachable? It also is like there are a lot of skillful things here. I think overall, it's also about like finding where like feedback is consistent in terms of, it's kind of like this thing that like, okay, can you trust where it's coming from? Does it have a viewpoint? Does it criticize you when you make mistakes? Does it also like cheer you on when you do good things? And I think that's like really important. That's what I kind of.
I'm not gonna say anything. I just enjoyed that sentence. That was fun.
The person I look for is like, okay, like I can like kind of trust this feedback because I know like where this person's coming from. I know how they feel, or I know like where with this group of people, like what their values are, and like this doesn't align here because of this.
I think my favorite part is how many people that just went over their head. And as you guys are like, what? I don't get it.
Does it criticize you when you make mistakes? Does it also like cheer you on when you do good things? And I think that's like really important. That's what I kind of personally look for is like, okay, like I can like kind of trust this feedback because I know like where this person's coming from. I know how they feel, or I know like where with this group of people, like what their values are, and like this doesn't align here because of this. Okay, like it just allows you to make more sense of it, and really take it to heart a bit faster.
Sure. So when you're implementing these ideas, I feel like recently there's been, honestly, frankly, a lot of experimentation. Like you guys have done some crazy stuff. It's been whether.
I just want to say really quick, that is the way it should be done. That is 100% the way it should be done. The way Alec just said. I laughed at it for obvious reasons. But that is the way it should be done. Because it's a tough line to walk when you're somebody who's like opinionated or talk about certain things. But you got to give credit when it's due. And if you don't like something and you criticize it, I think you have to be rightfully, like, you have to have your reasoning. You can't be just like, you, I hate you. You smell like shit. Why do you smell like shit? I don't know. You. It's like you gotta have reasons. You back it up. You tell why you feel that way. But then at the same time, when things are good, give them credit. Don't only just say you, and then they do something good, and you're like, should have done that from the start. I hate those people. I hate them. You know what I'm talking about. The fuckers who, like, even recently with the charity skin stuff with the pink merch, like, what took them so long? Why didn't they bring this back sooner? Give credit when it's due, and when it's not due, that's when you criticize. And that's how you build accountability. That's how you build credit with people. And there's a lot of creators that do this, and there's a lot of creators that don't do this, especially. That's why I always try to do both, because whether you're a doomer or a shill depends on the Wednesday that it's on, but it also depends on what's happening. And you should change your opinion. You should change the way you think about something as the facts change. Because if you don't do that, you're kind of just a piece of shit.
It's the quick play hacked, or even some of the event stuff that's been put under the, just put under these, new events and mirror watch. But there's just been a lot of felt like very, very aggressive patches, a lot of very aggressive experiments. Something that is really refreshing to me, I think, what was it, the Brigitte stat, 26, 27 nerfs before she finally fell out of meta over the course of it just felt like many times the Overwatch 1 team was very glacial, when it came to their approach. But you guys have been much more aggressive, much more open to taking risks, and then seemingly doing a good job at dialing back when those risks failed. Is this
Agreed.
A conscious decision for you guys?
Mostly.
Is this a philosophical change?
Recently, not as good,
or is this more of a recent development?
Basically, since the start of Overwatch 2, we've always wanted to make sure seasons can be these big shakeups.
Sure.
I think over
I don't agree
time,
with you there,
though,
Alec.
we've allowed ourselves to just react quicker to things.
Tell me where the biggest shakeup has been from season 6 through 11. One season, season 9. Season 10 felt the same as season 9, basically. Season 10 feels the same as season 11. Season 8 feels the same as season 7. Season 7 feels the same as season 6. Season 6 and season 5 had a big difference because it went from the Giga support creep to the nerfed supports. That was probably the two biggest, though. Season 1 and 9 felt the same to you? Bro, do you even play the game? How the f did they feel the same? You're high as balls. I'm sorry.
And be a bit more, liberal with that.
No,
We're
anything with
okay,
Prime.
if it doesn't work out, we're going to pull back a bit faster than we may have previously. So that allows us to experiment a bit more, push a bit more. I think we could even be doing more.
1 through 8. I thought you said 1 and 9. I'm like different dimensions.
This is a lot of these bespoke changes that occur, and we had to do a lot of testing to make sure that these actually get in a pretty good place to be presentable and things of that nature. And then I wish we had more gameplay systems that we could inject change into. I wish there was an easier.
I'm
going to
back up really quick. I wasn't paying that much attention. I'm sorry.
Though we've allowed ourselves to just react quicker to things and be a bit more liberal with that. We're like, okay, if it doesn't work out, we're going to pull back a bit faster than we may have previously. So that allows us to experiment.
Holy shit,
a bit more, push a bit more. I think we could even be doing more there, though. I think one of the things that's challenging, I think, for the balancing at the moment is this is a lot of these bespoke changes that occur, and we had to do a lot of testing to make sure that these actually get in a pretty good place to be presentable and things of that nature. And then I wish we had more gameplay systems that we could inject change into. I wish there was an easier way for us to inject wide change very quickly, and not just on the. I'm not necessarily just talking about passives. I'm talking about just what other gameplay systems can we have in Overwatch that allow change to be more rapid and allow it to come in a bit more easily. Yeah. Because it can be a lot of work to do one patch that changes the whole meta with things that feel new and things that feel right.
What does that mean though? Because he said very specifically passives. So he means gameplay mechanics outside of the hero playing itself. The first thing I think of, my head jumps to, is remember that trailer from season 11 that talked about that quick play hacked where they're trying new passives? I still think ever since I went on that one podcast with SVB, where I just started randomly just starting cooking it up, was the whole Apex Legends skill trees thing. If you could implement that in Overwatch somehow, that would be something that could they could make adjustments to the way every hero is played on multiple levels if we had a similar system, right? So basically, if you weren't there, the idea I was just kind of cooking up on the spot was, if you've never played Apex did a thing recently where as you level up through the match, you start doing more damage and you get kills, and you, instead of leveling up just your armor, there's an armor core that you level up. And as you level up the armor core, you can level up a tree. And there's only 3 options, right? One on each side. It's level 1, 2, 3 or whatever. And it's each one of them makes the hero or the legend you're playing stronger. So it's the cooldown is 2 seconds shorter. or the bubble is a little bit bigger on Gibraltar, but the cooldown's longer, right? Like you basically get to pick what playstyle you're going for. And if you do that in Overwatch, the Junkrat is how I basically describe it, is like there's two styles of Junkrat players. There's the gold player typically, which is like the spam chokes, try to do tons of damage to their tank. And then there's the assassin Junkrats who like literally come off the top ropes and they try to one-shot combo you with the left click and the mine. You could enable both styles as the game goes on, as like they level up and get kills, and you can kind of fight counter swapping, because like if you're leveling up a hero and you're trying to get better like abilities throughout the game, if you counter swap, you like get reset back down. So it's like, oh, like, you know, is it worth reset or counter swapping because I have a slightly leveled up hero, you know? And like you could do both. That would be a system that Overwatch could implement. It would make the game a lot more complex too. And that would be a new lever that they could adjust on certain things. So that's the first thing I jumped to. Like, what else could they even be alluding to?
As well, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan. I think obviously it's exciting to have
even something like items. Like if you could add items like to your character as the game goes on to like do slightly more damage or move slightly faster or whatever, stuff like that could also move the needle.
Add new things as a content creator to talk about. But for me, coming from somebody who's, you know, been involved in a lot of coaching and stuff like that and leadership, I think taking risks is required. You have to be willing to take risks. Otherwise, if you play it safe, you don't learn anything. And I very much for one appreciate that. So
yeah, I think season 9 was a big example of us taking
perfect,
risks,
right? Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And it paid off.
You know, sometimes you're going to have to take
a huge
criticism,
payoff,
right, when you do something wrong. But I feel like for the most
now
part,
I've been
a huge proponent of that as a fundamental philosophy change. And when you're trying these changes out, you guys have talked about your internal testing and many of those other things. Do you think that there's a way that do you have a method or a specific
items would lead to loot boxes? Me, when I'm a loot box
specific
coper.
way that you test out these changes? Do you think that method could be improved? Because I think a lot of that is kind of like, it's a mystery. It's behind the curtain. How do they come up with these ideas? Well, how do they test these ideas? How do they come up with these numbers? And some of those things come with criticism, right? Lifeweaver's release, a lot of people, myself included, was like, man, how is this testing with this character done? So, but at the same time, then you guys come up with, you know, really, really good idea. And it's like, okay, then how do they come up with this idea? How is this tested? So it's like, what is your current internal testing and how is it done? And would you like to see that improved?
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways we come with balance changes, we talk about the goals, you know, for the next patch. I think right now we're looking at doing a bigger tank patch. And it's like, okay, this is going to be the goals of this patch to get tanks into a place we think that they're feeling a bit better overall.
Sure.
And Josh and the balance team they'll talk over those changes. We'll playtest those quite a bit throughout the few weeks that we have. We'll get like a group that's a bit more competitive minded, like, okay, you know, we're actually in comms, like trying to actually stress test some of these things, and then we'll have like bigger review sessions. So I think that's a pretty good process as long as we can be reactive, you know, as long as we can be pretty fast when these things go out, because well, once you get those changes into the live environment, there may be things that are slightly unexpected, you know. Most of the changes fall in
so much more stress testing.
Yeah. Well, we're also, you know, there's historical things of, you know, lessons we learned over time about like, okay, what is this type of change going to do to this hero in terms of their viability, right? And we've had blind spots, but we've tried to improve those things over time. I think you mentioned Lifeweaver. You know, part of that was getting some of those more competitive-oriented playtests on the books. Another thing was,
I don't think I'll get in trouble for this. The reason I think a lot of people got really mad about it is like when 2022, like when we did that first summit about Overwatch stuff, like when we got to first, like before Overwatch 2 even launched, we saw a sneak preview of Lifeweaver, and everyone went, wait, that doesn't look very good. Like, what's going on there? You know? And then just nothing ever changed. So I don't think that they do the same thing anymore. I think they've changed a lot since then, which is good. But Jesus Christ, dude. Like, that was wild. That Lifeweaver came out the way that he is. And, like, how shit. Okay, Lifeweaver's a cool character. It's just, like, you can't do anything with him, right? Like, all the knobs that you turn on him are just kind of weird, I guess. Like, the pull is weird. The heal is weird. Like, you basically just a heal block character. The weapon swap was clunky and stupid. It's better now, but it's still not great. Is he really cool? I mean, like, the character's cool. It's just like the way it's plays is just, you know, and like, you know, you get pulled out of a fight as a tank player especially, and it's like it ruins your cooldowns. And it was the first hero in the history of Overwatch that no creator could do an unranked to GM1 release. It was the first hero in Overwatch history. Nobody pulled it off. It took multiple buffs to get there. Like, that's never happened in history of Overwatch. Or Phase 61. Appreciate it. So, like,
controller. I think that was one of our biggest blind spots for Lifeweaver. I know there's some clunkiness in terms of his controls and release, but on console we think that was even worse. So it was like.
But Boger didn't do it till Lifeweaver got buffed.
Oh, we just missed that, and so now it's like every few weeks there's a control play test to make sure we're doing our due diligence.
But chat, go watch the Boger video. It was after Weaver got buffed.
On that platform where it's a large part of our player base, to making sure that experience goes right too.
Okay.
And that
Close doesn't mean getting it,
just
though.
about like patching up some of those things as we go, making sure that our testing process gets better and better.
Sure. So when you're talking about a lot of things that you've learned, are there any perspectives, philosophies, ideas that have changed in your last year and a half since you've been here?
I think some of the things that, like from a balance standpoint at least, that are interesting about Overwatch is, and we talked about this in the AMA a few weeks ago, was how hard it can be for a hero's performance perception to shake off. I'm talking about like characters like Sojourn and Kiriko and things like that, where if players believe that they're good at only like we're talking about the top of the top of the top, that they're good everywhere, right? And it's like, oh, interesting, and I think that was something that was learned over time for me, and it was like, oh, like interesting. Y'all think Sojourn is this, and we understand why she's really good at like the higher levels, but but she's very, very popular everywhere else too. And there's satisfaction that's wrapped into that as well. So I think that was an interesting thing. But some things have just been confirmed, like over time. Metas are very how do I say this in a way? It's like they're not necessarily like static, right? They're not these things that are like set in stone. It's actually kind of like this. It's very social things about like how people play in an environment. Like metas are very different from region to region.
True.
Like Korea plays a lot more Ana, and they do much better on Ana as well. So it's not just about like these are the perfect things. It's
Well, Alec, there's a reason why they play Ana, and the reason why Ana's better there is because of Winston. All the Winston players, especially from Korea, are very, very good. Historically, back in the day when there was still Overwatch 1 and before even role lock, actually EU was thought of as like the tank heavy region where all the best tank players were out of EU on average. Now, obviously that didn't count for like certain like things like Winston or Diva, but like they had really good Rhine players, Hog players, Zarya players, right? And they typically ran comps that were much more tank heavy than other regions, right? NA was actually like more of the Rhine Zarya people. Korea was the Winston Diva. And then EU was more tank heavy stack. Like they play like 3 tanks, 4 tanks, right? The reason why Ana probably performs really well is because their Winston players are very good and they're better at the game than NA players. They just don't play Winston that often, and they just don't play it here. And because they haven't been playing it here for years, we default more to poke, we default more to Rhine, to the slower stuff. And so they've been playing it for so long, their perception over time was Winston is good, got to learn Winston, got to be good at Winston. And so the gap has gotten wider and wider. That's probably why you see much more Ana there performing well, because Ana does really well with Winston, but Winston players in NA are typically shit.
About, hey, what do these large group of people latch on
It's
to?
actually the tank players.
More and more.
And again, we learned this lesson in Overwatch 1. When certain supports are really good, that's what dictates the tank meta. It's not the tanks that dictate the meta, it's the supports that dictate the meta. The reason why Ana does so well is because Winston players are really good in Korea.
More so they get better at the thing. It's not that this is actually the perfect
Ask any pro Ana player. I bet that's what they would say.
3 times, and you may end up with like slightly different results based on like how the players, what they latch onto first.
Right.
And I think you even saw that like in Owl, like where like it was about sometimes it was about the team that found a strategy that worked first, like the best team, and that was the strat. It doesn't mean that it's like necessarily the perfect strat, but that was going to be the meta.
It feels even harder for you too, because it feels like the perception of a lot of times the higher ranked players trickles down because they are the community leaders, and so a lot of times there'll be a perception around a certain character that actually really doesn't matter all that much in lower ranks, but the lower ranks will still pair it or force or change their playstyle to match the opinion of the higher ranked player.
Oh,
That feels
totally.
like such a hard dynamic to balance around.
Yeah, and it's I think but as I said earlier, like the recent thing to me is the most interesting. It's like Roadhog doesn't get played in Korea, and Roadhog gets played like in EU and NA. Like if you actually look like on the ladder, it's like much higher. So it's so interesting how we, as players, we sort of like form this idea of what this thing is, even though it's kind of just where it's all.
Another interesting point though is communication is actually very prominent in Korea. They communicate much more often. And esports is taken much more seriously in Korea. When you try to sign into a PC Bang in Korea, which is like a PC cafe, you need to put in your literal social security number. It is very serious. They literally go hard on stuff like cheating and whatnot. Like you can get fined by the government. Like I don't know if it does. I don't think they do jail time, but like you get hefty government fines for cheating in a video game. You get cheating and nothing happens in America for cheating for a video game. The difference is like if you cheat in a video game in America, nothing happens. The difference is if you're making the cheat or distributing the cheat. That's like when you get into like the legal stuff. But like actually just cheating is not technically illegal. Like it's, you know what I mean? They take it much more seriously. So on the competitive side, they talk more. They communicate more. They care more.
First, and then it kind of evolved from there, right?
That's a social thing though. How the you balance out social?
We're going to move into some game design questions here. So there's been a lot of discussion around role passives, the psychology of whether free value feels earned, or is that a necessary something that the game needs to incorporate or not, and whether painting with a broad passive brush is awkward. The recent JQ change you guys did is a great example of how like finding workarounds with the tank passive that you guys have felt that tank is needed. There's been a lot of criticism around passives, whether it's the DPS passive, crucially a lot of the tank passive changes about whether it's balanced, whether it feels good, whether it's necessary, how it should be incorporated. I assume this is something that you guys are aware of. Do you guys have any plans on further tweaks to passives? Do you have has your approach to passives changed? Very broad question here.
Yeah, so one of the big reasons they're there is that we like having some consistent behavior across a role, so you understand what you're getting into in that engagement. I do think there's some things we want to tune a little bit with the passives, but I will say like when we're looking at our next patch, I think the thing we want to lean on most is making sure like the heroes themselves feel more active, they have more playmaking ability, and that's where you're feeling the change. I don't think you don't, as a tank, you don't necessarily feel every single passive tuning mark.
Right.
You might feel the 30 to 50% of the knockback, but
I feel the knockback one for sure.
From game to game, you may not feel some of the other ones, right? But it's like if we give you something actually for your kit, it's going to be much more pronounced. It's going to be something that actually like cuts through, and also that's actually the thing from what we've seen over time. It's going to make the biggest change to that hero's performance or survivability or whatever it may be. Is actually just changing something on the kit itself, right? So I think that's where we're going to lean more. Yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know because I think that's the big complaint with the passive is like it's good, but it doesn't make me enjoy playing the character anymore. Yeah. Right? Like a Winston might benefit from the reduced crit, but that doesn't make I don't feel enjoyment out of benefiting from that. Right? Okay, yeah, that's good to know. That's good to know.
Yeah. So I think it'll be kind of like a dual approach because there's still some things we want to tune with those, but if we have to make sure that there's changes for those heroes as an individual hero that allow them to feel better.
That's really, really good to hear. I think a lot of people are going to be very happy to hear that. Okay, so what is the team's stance and how a solo tank should feel? You talked about this earlier with terms of the CC with Wrecking Ball. I think the psychology in 5v5 of having only the one imposing figure on the field often means that the tank can be the center of attention with counter swapping, with debuffs, with damage focus. And yet at the same time, we have, frankly, tank is the most effective person on the field. They have the most expansive kits, the largest health pools. They just struggle with the amount of attention they get. Yeah. So you could be the most effective person in the battlefield, and yet it feels the worst as a solo tank. Is there anything that you guys have? I know this is a tricky topic that you guys have in terms of individual balance approach to the solo tank experience.
Yeah, as I said earlier, like our next patch is going to focus on that in particular. Hopefully make that experience even better. But our philosophy is like, it's the carry, not the chore. I think once you get to that element of like, if you're not feeling satisfied, you're not actually, living in the success of your team, you're just not having as much fun as some of the rest of the players in the match, right?
Yes.
You know, but you're right. You know, some of our philosophies, like tanks do set the rules of engagement, right? They are these big bruisers, right? They are this thing that we emphasize. There's a bit more decision making in terms of your position, in terms of how you take engagements, than maybe some of the other roles I have, because they dictate, you know, a little bit of the flow of an engagement. But we're going to be focusing on their playing capabilities and their defensive capabilities on a hero by hero basis, and
that's great.
Hopefully, that next patch hits pretty well. But that's what we're currently working on, because you know we see it. I do think.
So the next patch is a tank
they
patch.
Can make as many plays offensively and defensively.
Yes,
I'm
not going to lie to you.
And I think that's what we're going to be.
I'm not allowed to lie to you. I am not optimistic. I'm not. I hope I'm wrong, but I am not optimistic.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really good here, because as I said, it's like they are very effective, but they're very effective at manipulating attention, so much so that you can be effective and not be having fun. And I think that's scary. So that's awesome. And you say hero by hero a lot of it as well.
Yeah, and the objective there is not to make them unkillable,
yes,
but just to make sure they have more playmaking ability, more decision making.
You're not going to give every tank Orisa Fortify.
Okay. We'll see.
Okay. Oh, no. Okay.
Oh no, God!
I guess we've touched on this one a lot, so we can skim through this one already. But how much importance does the team place on psychological factors dictating decisions rather than objective balance? We talk about this just.
This is a Spilo question.
We talked about this with meta, right?
Spilo loves his psychology
to latch onto something. Do you guys all have masters in psychology? Do you guys factor any of this into your decision making? I assume the answer is yes, but.
Yes, I mean, if we hear that people aren't enjoying the game, even though we see this like perfect state of balance or whatever it may be, we're going to act, right? I think it's not about even tactically, right? It's about like people enjoying Overwatch as much as possible, and that's on like a hero kit basis, that's on like a meta basis. So I think it is the most important thing is like how are players, are they feeling when they're playing the game?
Sure.
Are they playing the game, right?
Sure.
Is that are they engaging with it the way we want them to? So
sure.
I think it trumps everything else, right?
Yeah, so. Absolutely. That's a tricky one though, because you are it tends to snowball very quickly. We
can't be too reactive at the same time,
right?
I do think that's like also a responsibility. It's not just swing as a pendulum back and forth. There's things we want like some consistency in the game from season to season, things like that, right? Because you can understand it better. Yeah.
Sure. A few last questions here. So talk to me about pickable passives if you can at all. I know this is coming up here soon. But this one was again another one of those curveballs that I never would have guessed in a million years, and yet had a lot of people talking. Like, wow, this is really interesting. I wonder what they're going to do.
Yeah. So for the event, you're going to come in and each role is going to have these 3 additional passives that you can choose from. So you can she come in, it's like, oh, do I want more ammo or do I want something else? Like on DPS, do I want to see critical enemies through walls, right? And we're going to talk about what those may be later. But we're really sort of testing some things, testing some gameplay systems. A lot of it's about okay, is this choice interesting for players to make? Are they changing their choice based on what the enemy's playing? Is this something they'll do before they switch their hero? Right? Is this something where they can play like a slightly different variation of a hero before they just actually make a counter swap? And does that feel good for them? Right? Do they feel like there's decision making there? Is the flow of it good? Like when you're actually in respawn, you want to switch, can you do it quick enough, or you feel like you're not wasting time? There's things like that. But we're testing out some gameplay systems. It's like a kind of a small look into something bigger we might do in the future of what that may be. Depending on how it goes.
Very interesting.
But, I think we're always testing something. I think this is a bigger quick play hack than we normally do, but we think this one's at least going to be a good conversation piece for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So since season 11, we initially had this interview scheduled, I believe, before season 11 or right at it.
Yeah.
Now we're coming with the retrospective, having the last 5, 6 days, 7 days, maybe even longer actually, of practice and trying out different things.
See enemies through
Any
walls.
initial first takes here? Anything cooking behind the scene here?
Back.
Tell me what you can.
I mean, a lot of it's rather expected, right? I think Roadhog's down significantly, Soldier's down significantly. Where's that Sojourn play rate going? It's like we're starting to see Ashe pop up a little bit. Symmetra's up, Ari's up, Darker Queen's on that rise. I think the one everyone's kind of aware of that we have our eyes on too is like Farah's like rise. It just continues to trend upward and upward. But Illari rising very quickly too, and I think Illari is gaining a lot from all the changes we had. There's also been the return to peak mercy effect, even in ranked. You start to see that. You're like, oh, okay, like
True.
there's a lot more mercy even in comp. So like popularity like the last 2 days, like whoop, I was like, oh, interesting. It's not just about getting quick play. It's like, oh, they want to play mercy and competitive as well. But yeah, those are some of the things that are happening. We're pretty happy overall of like how I think there's a lot of diversity in the meta right now. I think Cassie obviously is very, very popular, but outside of that, I think there's a lot of role diversity.
All right, I'm gonna ask the tough one. Malga. There's the word on the street is that there's a philosophy that people say Roadhog, Orisa, Malga. One of these guys is always meta. One of these guys is always meta. Now, frankly, I've been actually out of town. I've not played much ranked at all. But
word on Flat Street.
Is that something that you guys are aware of? Obviously, Roadhog weaker. Orisa's still pretty bad. What's Malga looking like right now
He's kind of like average / slightly below average, right? I would say play rate isn't up there with the top ones by any means. I think doing better in like pretty coordinated environments, but at the same time we are looking at some things longer term for Malga. I think there may be tweaking along the way.
The Overwatch brig effect,
like cardiac overdrive, and what we want to do.
Overwatch 1 brig effect.
We've run some experience before.
High level,
maybe there's some bigger things, bigger
goes
stuff
crazy.
And
low level, not doing too hot.
How effectively can he set squishies on fire, and can we bring that effectiveness into the kits somewhere else? So looking at some of that as well, I think that would give him more reward for diving some of those characters, and feel like he can accomplish that without having to shoot them a bunch before he gets to the ignite, things of that nature.
Sure. Broad question here, just one I threw in at the last minute. There's a lot of bugs. I think people are... Quaked is always talking about Doomfist bugs, and people are talking about Genji bugs, and there's this bugs. I know this may not be specifically your department, although you do have a little hand in everything. Are you aware of any bug fixes, map tweaks, anything that... whether it's environmental goof-ups or cooldown interactions, are you aware of any tweaks that are going on behind the scenes to address some of these minor but annoying quality of life things?
I mean, that's constantly happening, right?
Yeah,
right.
That's a hard one to answer.
A lot of times what happens, like some of the ones that aren't, immediately need to get fixed, they'll get fixed the next season. I think we can do a better job of like raising and like highlighting like when those things did change. I think like we've actually changed some things on Doomfist with some of the lockout time recently, right? But I'm not sure it was like in the patch notes fully, right? So there's like things like that. I think we can do a better job of making sure there's awareness when those things get fixed. But it's something that our QA team is constantly doing. There's just stuff coming in all the time.
Sure. Last question here. Anything that you want to be asked about? Anything that you haven't talked about?
I want to be asked about.
Anything that you were excited, amped up, spend about 7 hours preparing a long speech for?
Just one last juice question. What do you got?
No, I think all your questions are really good. Like, I'm excited when we can finally start sharing more about our next heroes, like in the future. Like, that's something that gets me really excited. So we're not that far away yet, right? But things like that. All right, go.
Is there any? You can say no. I won't get my feelings hurt. Is there anything that you can share us about either A, some of the upcoming tank tweaks, or B, Space Ranger?
Okay, so I'll try to repeat some things that were said at BlizzCon. For Space Ranger, where high mobility, versatile support, that's still very intact, right? That's very much what her playstyle is going to be about, and she brings some utility that is in the support cast that only one character has at the moment. So that's going to be a lot of fun. The game's going to be really fast. It's going to get really fast.
Okay.
Only one character has so far.
No comment there. And the anything with the tank?
I mean, kind of outlined some of those like individual things.
Okay.
I'm trying to think what was like.
I have a feeling we were doing a little speed,
I
what was the one the biggest ones?
Roadhog has 4 take a breathers now. Interchangeably.
When it was live.
Capabilities. I don't think that's what he's going to get in particular. I was running through them in my head. Which one, like Winston?
Yeah, I should back up really quick.
They're not like finalized yet, so I'm trying to think like what was the one the biggest ones?
Roadhog has 4 take a breathers now. Interchangeably. Get some CC
I don't think
immunity.
Roadhog's going to get more defensive capabilities. I don't think that's what he's going to get in particular. I was running through them in my head. Which one, like Winston? We're looking at how to make the ultimate a little bit better, and how to maybe the right click can be a bit more responsive. Doesn't need to take as long as it does to charge at the moment. Things like that.
Okay.
We can
That's exciting.
Tap some targets a little bit quicker.
Okay.
Reinhardt, still working through Reinhardt, but can charge V300 damage again. I think that's one of the ones we're looking at where it's okay, now it's going to hit most of the characters in the cast.
That's exciting.
Stuff like that.
That's exciting. That's going to get a lot of people, I think, talking.
Man, if only someone said that years ago.
Man, I really appreciate your time. This was obviously super, super generous of you. For those of you guys in chat, this was, obviously not necessarily something that needed to be scheduled, but was very generous of you to offer to do. And obviously,
if only there was someone who said that years ago.
I'm going to start writing as many questions as I can here. But yeah,
and thank you.
Alec,
thank you for taking all the time to do that. Writing all the questions. I think they were really great. So,
of course. Again, this is great, man. Phenomenal. Well, have a good rest of your week. Looking forward to some of the upcoming changes.
All right, that's pretty good. Good questions. I definitely still feel a little weird about how it seems like they're shifting their philosophy back towards original, Overwatch launch. And I very recently was just ranting about that and how it seems like they're kind of letting the game guide them instead of them guide the game. So if that is the new philosophy, and they are going to go back to being we actually don't like that play style. We actually don't want you to be able to just pick one character or one ability and just instantly shoot, destroy someone's ability to play the game. That's a good thing for sure. Just, let's keep it consistent, and hopefully more of changes come, because if so far it doesn't feel like that's the new thing, if that makes sense.